A signal tells others your intention. It does not create space. 0. A city square in Athens, 5 centuries before Jesus was born. A trumpet sounds across the marketplace, sharp and unmistakable. And from every street, every workshop, every home within the city walls, men stop what they are doing and start walking toward the same open hill. This was not a religious gathering. It was not optional. When that trumpet sounded, it meant the assembly had been called, and every citizen who heard it had both the right and the responsibility to show up. The Greek word for that gathering was Ekklesia, and centuries later, when the writers of the New Testament needed a word to describe what Jesus was building, this is the exact word they reached for. We translate it church. And somewhere between a hillside in Athens and a building on a street corner today, the word quietly stopped meaning what it originally meant and started meaning something Jesus never actually said. You have probably never thought twice about the word church. You drive past one on your way to work. You say you're going to church on Sunday morning. The word points, almost automatically, to a building with a steeple or a sign out front. But the word Jesus and his apostles used never once described a structure of brick or stone. It described something else entirely. Something that meets in a building sometimes, but was never made of one. To understand why, you have to go back before Jesus ever spoke into the civic life of the Greek city-state, because that is where Ekklesia was born. In a Greek polis like Athens, the Ekklesia was the formal assembly of citizens called together to debate and decide the affairs of the city. Not a crowd that happened to gather. Not a mob that formed spontaneously in the street. A specific, summoned body of people, with the legal standing to vote on laws, to declare war, to exile a citizen, to decide how the city's resources would be spent. The word comes from ek, meaning out of, and kaleo, meaning to call. Literally, the called out ones. People summoned out of their ordinary business into a gathering with real authority and real purpose. This detail matters more than it first appears. Membership in the Ekklesia was not for everyone in the city. Slaves could not attend. Foreigners could not attend, no matter how long they had lived there. Women could not attend. Only free adult male citizens, formally recognized as belonging to the body politic, had the right to walk up that hill. When the trumpet sounded, belonging to the Ekklesia was one of the highest marks of status a person could hold. In the ancient Greek world, it meant you counted. It meant your voice mattered in decisions that shaped the entire city. Picture that hillside assembly in full session. Thousands of citizens seated on stone steps, carved into a natural amphitheater, a speaker's platform at the center, officials calling for votes by a show of hands. Debates could run for hours. Decisions made there were binding on the whole city, whether a citizen had shown up to vote or not. This was not a casual social club. This was the mechanism by which an entire civilization governed itself. Now, carry that picture forward a few centuries, into a small, mostly powerless religious movement, spreading out from Jerusalem, after a crucified rabbi's followers claimed he had risen from the dead. When the writers of the New Testament reached for a word to describe this new community Jesus was forming, they had other options available to them. They could have used synagogue, the word for a religious gathering, already familiar and comfortable, the word used for Jewish congregations meeting to study the law. They did not choose that word for the church, even though it was sitting right there, ready to use. They reached instead for Ekklesia, the loaded, politically charged word for a summoned civic assembly, with real standing and real authority. That choice was not an accident, and it was not neutral. It was making a claim. Here's where the popular modern picture starts to come apart. When you hear the church, you likely picture a building, or at best a religious institution running on its own separate track from the rest of ordinary life. But the first people to hear this word applied to themselves would have heard something else entirely. they would have heard a claim about citizenship, about a summons, about belonging to a body with genuine standing and genuine purpose in the world, gathered by a call that came from outside themselves. Watch how consistently the New Testament writers lean into this civic weight, rather than softening it. In Philippians, Paul tells a mostly Gentile congregation living in a Roman colony, proud of their Roman citizenship, that their true politeuma, their citizenship, their commonwealth, is in heaven. That word shares the same root as Ekklesia. Paul is deliberately borrowing the vocabulary of civic belonging and applying it to something larger than any earthly city. In Ephesians, Paul tells former outsiders, people once excluded from the covenant community of Israel, the way a foreigner was excluded from the Athenian assembly, that they are now fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God. The very group once locked out of civic belonging is now formally admitted into the highest form of belonging there is. This is why, throughout the New Testament, the word Ekklesia is almost never used for a building. Paul writes to the Ekklesia of God in Corinth, and everyone reading that letter knew he meant the actual people, the assembly, not the room they happened to meet in. Believers gathered in private homes for the first several centuries of church history, sometimes in borrowed spaces, sometimes outdoors, and every time the word Ekklesia is used in those early letters, it means the gathered people themselves, summoned and called, never the four walls around them. So why did church come to mean a building? The English word itself carries a completely different history than Ekklesia does. Church descends from an old Germanic word, kirche, which most scholars trace back to the Greek kyriakon, meaning belonging to the Lord. Originally used specifically for a building set apart and consecrated for worship, the Lord's house. That word made its way through centuries of European Christianity, largely unconnected to Ekklesia at all, until eventually English translators used the same word, church, to render both ideas, the building called kyriakon, and the assembly called Ekklesia, collapsing two originally separate concepts into a single English word. Once that happened, most English readers had no way of knowing the two ideas had ever been distinct. And once you see that collapse, you start noticing its effects everywhere. People today speak of going to church the way they would speak of going to a store, treating attendance at a location as the substance of the thing itself. A building can stand empty all week and still be called the church on a map or a sign. But in the New Testament's vocabulary, an empty building was never the Ekklesia of anything. The Ekklesia was the summoned people, wherever they were. Quick word before we keep going. If studies like this are helping you read your Bible with fresh eyes, the best way to support this channel is to subscribe and leave a comment. It genuinely helps these videos reach people searching for exactly this. And if you're already part of this community, thank you. So if Ekklesia means a summoned assembly with real civic standing rather than a building, what was Jesus actually claiming when he first used the word? In Matthew 16, standing at Caesarea Philippi, in the shadow of a massive rock face carved with niches for pagan gods, Jesus turns to Peter and says, "On this rock I will build my Ekklesia, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." He is not promising to construct a building. He is promising to summon and assemble a body of people with real standing, real authority, and a purpose that no earthly power, not even death itself, could shut down. The imagery of gates suggests something defensive being besieged, and Jesus says the opposite will happen. His summoned people will be the ones advancing, not the ones under siege. It's worth being honest about how the building-centered reading took hold, because it did not happen out of malice. As Christianity moved from small house gatherings into an officially sanctioned religion under Constantine in the 4th century, believers finally had the freedom and the resources to construct dedicated worship spaces. Those buildings needed a name, and church, carrying the old sense of the Lord's house, was a natural choice. Over centuries, as those buildings became the most visible, permanent expression of Christian community, the word's center of gravity shifted From the people who gathered, to the structure they gathered in, nobody set out to replace one meaning with another. The building simply became so prominent, so central to daily life, that the word quietly wrapped itself around them instead. But we have to be careful walking the other direction too, because there's a ditch on that side just as real as the first one. Recovering the summoned people instead of the building does not mean physical gathering. Structure or institutional life are unimportant, or that anyone claiming to be spiritual but disconnected from any actual assembly of believers has fully grasped what Ekklesia means either. The word describes people who are genuinely called out and gathered, not scattered individuals who never assemble with anyone at all. An Ekklesia that never convenes is a contradiction in terms. The correction is not permission to disappear from community. It is a reminder of what the community actually is once it does gather. Picture that Athenian hillside once more, but empty this time. Stone steps carved in a perfect amphitheater, a speaker's platform standing silent at the center, wind moving across bare rock. No trumpet has sounded. No citizens have come. Is this the Ekklesia? By every definition the ancient world understood, the answer is no. The Ekklesia was never the hillside itself, however carefully carved, however impressive its architecture. The Ekklesia was the moment thousands of summoned citizens filled those steps, voices rising, hands lifted for a vote, a body with real weight and real authority, temporarily made visible on stone, that would otherwise sit empty and silent. Now picture believers scattered across a city, some in offices, some in fields, some in kitchens, ordinary people going about ordinary business through the week. And then picture the summons going out, the call to gather, and those same people converging from every direction into a single room, a single body, carrying real spiritual authority and real purpose. The moment they assemble together, that gathering, wherever it happens, in a cathedral or a living room or a prison cell, is the Ekklesia. The building, if there is one, is simply where the summoned people happen to meet that day. So where does this land for you? Maybe you've spent years disillusioned by an institution, watching buildings and budgets and programs get treated as though they were the point, while the actual summoned people, gathered and called by something outside themselves, felt like an afterthought. Hear this clearly. That confusion was never what the word meant. You were never wrong to sense that something essential was missing when the structure took center stage and the summoned assembly faded into the background. The word was always pointing at people, not property. Or maybe you've drifted the other direction, quietly telling yourself that faith is a private matter, and gathering with other believers is optional, a preference rather than something built into the word itself. If that's you, let the empty Athenian hillside challenge you gently. Stone steps carved with care mean nothing without the citizens who fill them. Whatever it costs you to show up, to be summoned out of your ordinary business into an actual gathered body of people, that showing up is not a small addendum to the faith. It is close to the center of what the word has always meant. And maybe you've simply never heard this before, and something in you is quietly relieved. The failures you've watched in religious institutions, the scandals, the emphasis on buildings and budgets over people, none of that was ever what the word promised in the first place. The word was never a promise about architecture or organizational success. It was a promise about a people, summoned by a call greater than themselves, carrying real standing and real purpose, wherever they happened to gather. The word was never asking you to admire a building. It was asking whether you would answer a summons. A call that goes out across ordinary life, the way a trumpet once rang out over Athens, pulling citizens away from their shops and their fields, into something with weight, something with voice, something the gates of death itself were promised never to overcome. That is the Ekklesia Jesus said he would build. Not stone, not steeple. People, called out and gathered, again and again, for as long as the summons keep sounding. If this changed the way you hear that word today, subscribe, leave a comment below, and share it with someone who has been quietly disillusioned by an institution. and needs to hear that the word was never about the building in the first place. God bless you.